Gaudeamus omnes in Domino, diem festum celebrantes, sub honore sanctorum omnium.
Welcome to The Way of the Fathers, a podcast sponsored by CatholicCulture.org. I'm your host, Mike Aquilina. In this episode, we arrive at the last of the Latin Fathers, Isidore of Seville. Isidore was a man who deserved better times to live in. He was meant to be the sort of squirrely old scholar who spends his days among piles of books discovering wonderful new tracks through the writings of the ancients. And in fact, he spent as much of his life that way as he could. Thanks to Isidore's insatiable collecting, we have bits and pieces of ancient authors whose works would otherwise have vanished. But Isidore lived in one of the darkest times for civilization in Europe. He was born into a world where the Roman Empire had collapsed, and no one knew what to do with all the scattered pieces. Literacy had become rare, and literature was rarer. In a long and active life, Isidore found himself called on to participate in some of the great political and social upheavals of his time. For that he was well prepared. Isidore hailed from a cultured and deeply Christian family in southern Spain. He was born around the year 560, probably in Cartagena, a city that was then held as a western outpost of the Byzantine Empire. The adjacent lands in the Iberian Peninsula, however, were ruled by the Visigoth kings, barbarians who had seized the lands from Rome almost 200 years earlier. The Visigoths kept to the Arian heresy long after it had vanished from other lands. Isidore was one of 4 children, all of whom entered the service of the church. He and both of his brothers, Leander and Fulgentius, would become bishops. His sister, Florentina, entered the convent and won renown as an abbess. At some point early in Isidore's childhood, the family moved about 350 miles westward and inland to Seville. There he received an excellent education at the cathedral school. He completed the classical course of Latin studies and even learned a bit of Greek and Hebrew. While Isidore was still a teenager, his older brother Leander entered a monastery and then, soon afterward, was named Archbishop of Seville. Fiercely Catholic in his sympathies, Leander brought about the conversion of a member of the royal family. Afterward, he got caught up in the young prince's scheme to overthrow his father and seize the throne. The plot failed, the prince was executed for treason, and Leander was exiled to Constantinople, where he struck up a lasting friendship with the future pope, Gregory the Great. At some unknown date, Leander returned to Spain, and with his brother Isidore, resumed the work of evangelizing the Arian Visigoths. Together they succeeded, converting the king in 589. The Third Council of Toledo, convoked that year, effectively returned the church in Spain to the full authority of the Catholic bishops. In 600 or 601, Leander died, and Isidore was chosen to be his successor as Archbishop of Seville, an office he would hold for almost 35 years. Isidore recognized the needs of his people at that particular moment in history. The Iberian Peninsula was at the end of 2 centuries of slow transition, from a Roman province to a distinct and independent nation. A new culture was forming, a melting pot of Roman and northern elements. Isidore believed that to be Spanish was to lay claim to both patrimonies. In a sense, he was simply continuing the work begun by his brother. But Isidore had certain advantages. One was established royal patronage. By the time Isidore took the mitre, Spain had been united under a Catholic monarch for more than a decade. And this led to a second great advantage: stability. Isidore never suffered, as Leander had, the disruptions that came with exile. He was in for the long haul, he had an agenda, and he was untiringly productive as he carried it forward. He wanted to unite the people in a common faith and under the Catholic king. After years of regional and religious strife, this was no easy task. Isidore saw that only with an educated clergy could he overcome residual Arianism in the realm. So he established a college in Seville for the formation of priests. He then advanced the idea at regional and national synods so that such colleges became standard in every Spanish diocese. Eventually, these Spanish schools would serve as models for similar institutions throughout Europe. Again, like his brother, Isidore recognized the importance of liturgy in the life of the church and the culture. Ritual worship served a unifying purpose. In the natural order, it brought people together and gave them a common language and common symbols. Over the course of his episcopate, Isidore completed the work begun by Leander to fuse the elements of Roman and Visigothic worship, creating a distinctively Spanish liturgy, which would eventually be known as the Mozarabic Rite. His programs for education and liturgy Isidore advanced at local councils in Seville and national councils in Toledo. But they succeeded largely because Isidore himself created a literature that could serve as a national curriculum. He possessed an intellect that ranged across many disciplines. He loved to read, and his love is evident in his penchant for quotation. He amassed many selections from authors he had read, the very famous and the quite obscure. In doing this, he preserved fragments of classical learning that otherwise would have been lost. For the wall of his library, he composed this admonition: "Beyond many sacred works, behold many profane works. If you like some poetic composition, take it and read. See these fields full of thorns where roses abound. Avoid the thorns and gather the roses." He also urged others to imitate him in his love of books and boundless curiosity. On another wall of his library, he wrote, "These bookcases of ours hold a great many books. Behold and read, you who so desire. Here, lay aside your sluggishness. Put off your fastidiousness of mind. Believe me, brother, you will return thence a more learned man." But perhaps you say, why do I need this now? For I would think no study still remains for me. I have unrolled histories and hurried through all the law. Truly, if you say this, then you yourself still know nothing. The books that Isidore read, and they were many, inspired the books he would write. And these too were many in number. He produced treatises on fields as diverse as astronomy, history, biography, theology, biblical interpretation, and mystical numerology. His works provide an invaluable record of the process of his people's transition and cultural redefinition. Though Isidore wrote in Latin, he used well over 1,000 new Spanish words. Historians also give him credit for codifying a system of punctuation for the written word. It seems he invented the comma, the period, and the colon. His greatest book is undoubtedly his Etymologies. It's a 20-volume encyclopedia in which he tried to compile all the knowledge that was left in the world. Within the work, there are individual books dedicated to grammar, rhetoric, mathematics, medicine, law, angels, geology, geography, agriculture, war, and other topics. Isidore sought to lead readers to the true essence of the things, and he did this by hunting down the origins of the words that represented those things. When he lacked evidence, he would speculate, and sometimes his definitions are more allegorical than historical. He wanted his readers to understand God's intention in creating this or that thing with all of its peculiar attributes. The Etymologies was a work in progress throughout Isidore's life, and still unfinished at the time of his death. It is a work of eccentric genius, and in compiling it, Isidore invented a new genre. Modern encyclopedias trace their own origin to his 7th century work. And the Etymologies has even been called the progenitor of the World Wide Web. there has been a movement in recent years to recognize Isidore as the patron saint of the internet. In his desire to create an omnibus of knowledge, Isidore also anticipated the development of the medieval compendia and summae. Thus, just as he is called the last scholar of antiquity, so he's also known as the founder of the Middle Ages. Indeed, his books remained in demand as standard textbooks throughout the medieval period in Europe. His mind was quite unlike that of Maximus the Confessor, his Byzantine contemporary. Isidore had no special talent for synthesis. He offered no original contributions in any of the fields he zealously explored. But he was an enthusiastic collector and compiler, and he excelled in communicating his sense of fascination. He was spectacularly successful in communicating the essence of Spain as a land and a people with an identity of its own, distinct from its Roman and Visigothic ancestors. He begins his history of the Visigoths with a prologue titled Laus Spaniae, Praise of Spain, and he does not hesitate to place his homeland at the top of every list for every quality and virtue. Here it is. Of all the lands from the west to the Indies, you, Spain, O sacred and always fortunate mother of princes and peoples, are the most beautiful. Rightly are you now the queen of all provinces, from which not only the west but also the east borrows its shining lights. You are the pride and the ornament of the world, the more illustrious part of the earth. Indulgent nature has deservedly enriched you with an abundance of everything fruitful. You are rich with olives, overflowing with grapes, fertile with harvests. You are dressed in corn, shaded with olive trees, covered with the vine. Your fields are full of flowers, your mountains full of trees, and your shores full of fish. You are located in the most favorable region in the world. Neither are you parched by the summer heat of the sun, nor do you languish under the icy cold, but girded by a temperate band of sky, you are nourished by fertile west winds. You bring forth the fruits of the fields, the wealth of the mines, and beautiful and useful plants and animals. Nor are you to be held inferior in rivers, which the brilliant fame of your fair flock ennobles. And he goes on. In Laus Spaniae, Isidore introduces the phrase Mother Spain, which patriots have continued to invoke down to our own time. Perhaps as much as anyone in Spanish history, he merits the title Father of his country. He was there at the birth of an independent Spain, and he was the first to describe the unique character of the people and the land, and provide their genealogy. Isidore died in 636, having served as archbishop for 35 years, following his brother Leander's reign of 20 years. As he closed his eyes for the last time, he closed the book on the patristic era, at least in the West. In our next episode, we'll turn to the last of the Eastern Fathers, John of Damascus. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If so, I ask you to please consider making a donation. We're entirely listener-funded. Just visit us at CatholicCulture.org and look for the button that says Donate. We're grateful for anything you can give. Remember, we pray for our benefactors every day. I thank you for listening.
De quorum solemnitate gaudent angeli et collaudant filium Dei.
Way of the Fathers is just one of the podcasts produced by CatholicCulture.org. To hear more from the Church Fathers in their own words, check out Catholic Culture audiobooks, readings of Catholic classics, including the Fathers and St. John Henry Newman. You might also enjoy Criteria, the the Catholic Film Podcast, devoted to works of high artistic caliber and Catholic interest. And for interviews on a wide range of topics in Catholic arts and culture, listen to the Catholic Culture Podcast.